Well, hello, good evening, and welcome to the Shakespeare Hour Live. My name is Simon Godwin. I'm the Artistic Director of the Shakespeare Theatre Company in Washington, D.C., and welcome to, believe it or not, our 35th show. Wow, the Shakespeare Hour, it keeps going from strength to strength, and thank you so much for joining us tonight to talk about Shakespeare and the couple, or Shakespearean couples, a celebration of our proximity to Valentine's Day. We're hoping to delve into what love, romance, and coupledom means through the lens of Shakespeare. Well, before we get started to meet our wonderful guest tonight, some thank yous. Shakespeare Hour Live is sponsored by the extraordinary Beach Street Foundation and is additionally supported tonight by Nan Beckley. Thank you so much, Nan. And tonight's episode is uniquely sponsored by the Brugman family. We're enormously grateful for all of your support. Well, we have a wonderful panel of guests tonight, including our first couple. Well, I mean, it's an appropriate thing to have on the episode about couples. They are a wonderful couple who are actors, and they are, of course, Christian Conn, STC-affiliated artist, who is no stranger to STC stages, having most recently appeared in The Comedy of Errors, directed by Alan Paul in 2018. He's also appeared in many, many shows. I'm going to share some of them with you. Desire Under the Elms on Broadway, productions at Red Bull Theatre, Classic Stage Company, and many, many more. And he's joined by Ishmenia Mendes, whose many New York theatre credits include the critically acclaimed Macbeth at Red Bull Theatre, Much Ado About Nothing, and Troilus and Cressida for the public, and recurring television roles on Netflix, HBO, and Apple TV. So without further ado, Christian and Ishmenia, are you there?
Hi, yes,
Hello.
We are coming to you live from South Brooklyn, New York. Thank you so much for having us.
Very happy to be
Thank you
here.
for joining us. How do you feel about being our first Shakespeare Hour Live couple?
I'm just excited. I realize one of the tragedies of this COVID thing has been that I haven't had my nose in a Shakespeare play in a while. Normally we're auditioning or doing readings or doing an actual play, God forbid, but it's been a while. So this is
Terrified.
Yeah, terrified also.
Because you're actually going to be doing some readings for us tonight, which is really exciting. Let me ask you, have you ever been in a play together before?
Yes, in fact,
Have we ever?
we sort of owe our relationship to the Shakespeare Theatre in a roundabout way, because I did a production in 2010 of Pierre Corneille by way of David Ives' The Liar. And then when that play was done in New York 3 or 4 years ago, Milady joined the cast. And so that's actually where we met, was doing a play that originated and was commissioned by the Shakespeare Theatre.
Mm-hmm.
I am so happy that we've played Cupid. So that bodes well. Thank you so very much. And
Thank you.
thanks for being on the show. Let me now introduce Dr. Francis Dolan, Distinguished Professor of English at the University of California in Davis. Dr. Dolan is an award-winning teacher and a former president of the Shakespeare Association of America. Wow. And she's the author of 6 books and numerous essays, and has written extensively on marriage in the early modern period. So on so many levels, an extraordinary guest tonight to help us shed light on what Shakespeare means by a couple. Fran, if I may call you that, good evening and welcome.
Hello, I'm happy to be here.
Oh, wonderful. And you're, I think, chatting to us tonight from Davis, California. Is that right?
Yes, so I'm representing a garden behind me that's on the Davis campus. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's absolutely beautiful. I spent some of last year living at Oak Spring Garden Foundation, Bunny and Paul Mellon's kind of garden estate, and looking at your garden behind you, it reminds me of Bunny Mellon's great work in horticulture.
Oh, nice.
Terrific. Well, Grace Ann Roberts is here tonight, of course, sharing your questions, thoughts, and comments. Grace Ann, you're happy and safe and with us?
I am happy. I am safe. I'm with you. Hello, everyone. Yes, keep your questions coming. We have a great panel tonight, and we look forward to answering some of your queries about your favorite Shakespearean couples. So happy to be here.
Wonderful. And finally, it falls to me to introduce Dr. Drew Lichtenberg, our resident dramatag and co-host of the Shakespeare Hour Live. Good evening, Drew.
Good evening, Simon. And without further ado, I would like to introduce our topic tonight, which is Shakespeare's couples. We've had a few of these thematized episodes in the past. We've discussed Shakespeare's clowns with Bill Irwin, among others, Shakespeare's heroines with Helen Hunt and others, and Shakespeare and the Supernatural with Corey Stahl, among other distinguished panelists. So I recommend you get yourselves on YouTube and check those out. As Simon mentioned, in honor of the forthcoming Valentine's Day festivities, if you can call them that, in 4 days, it felt appropriate tonight to be discussing Shakespeare and couples. And when you think about Shakespeare's couples, you start to think about the pairs of plays in Shakespeare's plays. He loves to contrast characters with one another. Obviously, there are many same-sex friendships, such as Kate and Bianca. I don't know if they're friends in Taming of the Shrew, but they're certainly sisters. Valentine and Proteus in The Two Gentlemen of Verona, one of the earliest plays. Most famously, Hermia and Helena, and Lysander and Demetrius in A Midsummer Night's Dream. Sometimes these same-sex friendships have queer or homoerotic overtones, thinking of Antonio and Sebastian in Twelfth Night, Achilles and Patroclus in Troilus and Cressida, Antonio and Bassanio in The Merchant of Venice. But tonight we are focusing on 3 opposite-sex romantic couples, Orsino and Viola in Twelfth Night, Romeo and Juliet from the play of that name, and of course, Antony and Cleopatra. And what's interesting about these 3 couples, there are many things that are interesting about them, is that they each depict, by Shakespeare, different aspects of romantic love. The pursuit of love, maybe the recognition of love in disguised and open form in Twelfth Night, the thrill of young love in Romeo and Juliet, and then mature or older love, the difficulties of love at an advanced age in Antony and Cleopatra. So it's the fascinating thing to think about the way Shakespeare throughout his career examines romantic love through heterosexual couples. So we've sent Christian and Ishmenia 3 sides to read, and we thought we would, do a text-heavy hour of the Shakespeare Hour live tonight. Set up our text, hear a little bit of text, and then discuss. So we're starting with Twelfth Night. This is Act 2, Scene 4. And just to refresh some of your memories on Twelfth Night, Viola is shipwrecked on the coast of Illyria and forced to don the disguise of a youth, a clean-shaven youth named Cesario. And she gets herself a job at the court of the lovelorn, melancholy, music-drunken Duke Orsino. And Orsino is completely besotted with the Countess Olivia and orders Cesario to be his go-between, his messenger, bearing presumably execrably written love poetry to Olivia. I think we hear brief snatches, but it's mostly left to our imaginations. And Orsino, of course, he's unaware that Cesario is really a her, Viola. And this scene is one of the central scenes in the play where Orsino basically tells Viola, you don't know what it's like to love because, well, we men, we understand what it's like to be suffering the pangs of unrequited love. Women can never understand our pain. And Viola / Cesario replies to him in a way that completely blows his mind and rocks his world. So Christian and Ishmenia, I wonder if you could take it away for us.
You betcha. My life upon, young though thou art, thine eye hath stayed upon some favor that it loves. Hath it not, boy?
A little, by your favor.
Ah, what kind of womanist?
Of your complexion.
She is not worth thee, then. What years of faith?
About your years, my lord.
Too old, by heaven. Let still the woman take an elder than herself. So wears she to him, so sways she level in her husband's heart. For boy, however we do praise ourselves, our fancies are more giddy and unfirm, more longing, wavering, sooner lost and worn than women's are.
I think it well, my lord.
Then let thy love be younger than thyself, for thy affection cannot hold the bent. For women are as roses, whose fair flower being once displayed, doth fall that very hour.
And so they are. Alas, that they are so. to die even when they to perfection grow.
Once more, Cesario, get thee to yon same sovereign cruelty. Tell her my love, more noble than the world, prizes not quantity of dirty lands. The parts that fortune hath bestowed upon her, tell her I hold as giddily as fortune. But 'tis that miracle and queen of gems that nature pranks her in attracts my soul.
But if she cannot love you, sir.
I cannot be so answered.
Sooth, but you must. Say that some lady, as perhaps there is, hath for your love as great a pang of heart as you have for Olivia. You cannot love her. You tell her so. Must she not then be answered?
There is no woman's sides can bide the beating of so strong a passion as love doth give my heart. No woman's heart so big to hold so much. They lack retention. Alas, their love may be called appetite. No motion of the liver, but the palate that suffer surfeit, cloyment, and revolt. But mine is as hungry as the sea, and can digest as much. Make no compare between that love a woman can bear me, and that I owe Olivia.
Aye, but I know
What dost thou know?
too well what love women to men may owe. In faith, they are as true of heart as we. My father had a daughter loved a man, as it might be, perhaps, were I a woman, I should your lordship.
And what's her history?
Blank, my lord. She never told her love, but let concealment, like a worm if bud, feed on her damask cheek. She pined in thought, and with a green and yellow melancholy, she sat like Patience on a monument, smiling at grief. Was not this love indeed? We men may say more, swear more, but indeed our shows are more than will. For still we prove much in our vows, but little in our love.
But died thy sister of her love, my boy?
I am all the daughters of my father's house, and all the brothers too. And yet I know not.
Wow.
Brilliant.
Yeah, Simon, you were going to say something.
Wow, congratulations. I mean, that's just such a, I mean, in a moment, I'm going to pass over to Fran for her thoughts on that scene, but I want to say just what so beautifully read, Christian and Ishmania, thank you. And it's so many kind of extraordinary plays on disguise, self, authenticity, male, female, and solipsistically, it just brought back memories of myself working on the play as I did at the National Theatre some years ago. And it's just a beautiful scene to sit in with an audience with all these ripples of laughter and excitement at how this character almost gives herself away as you played so beautifully then. But yeah, Fran, so congratulations to the actors. Thank you. What a joy to hear Shakespeare read so beautifully. But Fran, over to you.
I agree. Hooray. And there's so much to talk about in this scene. I want to go back to where Drew began with what is a couple, because when we listen to the reading, we're reminded that if we're looking at our pages, and we all have these pages, we see Viola and Orsino. But if we're in the theater, we don't hear the name Viola until Act 5. We meet a character in the second scene of the first act who decides to take on a different identity. But the whole rest of the play, we know Cesario. And even at the end of the play, you know, again, we only learn the name Viola in Act 5. And one of the great things about this play, I think, is that Cesario remains dressed as Cesario to the very end. And Orsino says, I'm going to keep calling you Cesario as long as you're dressed as Cesario. So they go off as Cesario and Orsino. So I think that there's an eroticism in this scene, absolutely, of the slipping between the different genders and personae that we have in this character, Cesario. And I think the way that Ishmenia was giving us a sense of tap dancing, right? And trying to figure out how to handle this awkward situation, I think is really important. But I think partly it is Cesario and Orsino in this scene, as it is through so much of the play. He loves Olivia. We don't even see the two of them together until Act 5. And he almost never talks about her. This is about as much as Orsino gives us on Olivia here. And his idea of really splashing out is saying, it's not her lands and money, it's that she's gorgeous. Okay, thank you, Orsino. That makes everyone feel so much better. And also there's a moment when Feste says of Orsino, thy mind is a very opal. And the lines that we got here show us why. Because he's telling us, okay, women have giddy appetites. First he says, their love, they lack retention. They can't love as passionately as men can. But he also tells us that men need younger wives because they surf it very quickly, and they can stay attached only if they've kind of worn the woman to themselves. And surfeit is a word he uses in his very first speech to get us to see that he's always, Drew described him as melancholic. He's always imagining how he's not going to be able to sustain his love. So he's giving us a lot of evidence about himself. We tend to focus on how Cesario is revealing and not revealing. And also just the final, there's so many things to say, but the way that just the pronouns give you a sense of the conundrum of Cesario. Are men we and women they? Well, Cesario plays that game with Orsino, but there's a sense of not being able to comfortably identify with any of those positions. And they're also so conventional. You can even imagine a Cesario doing the big eye roll at the moment when we get the, women are as roses, the gather ye rosebuds trope. It's so conventional. And it shows you how much Orsino is studying his anthology of Renaissance poetry as much as he's thinking about the actual partners that are available to him.
Yes, I think that's absolutely great, and it makes me feel strongly there's this journey in the play between, of imagined love and real love, that which is in your imagination and that which is in front of you. And I suppose that's also the pleasure of the scene that we've just heard, that you feel somebody being very present and trying to say something, and someone else, as you said, kind of lost in the mind, not quite seeing what's in front of them. Christian and Ishmael, how did it feel reading it or working on that scene? And have you done the play before? What was their kind of thoughts going out into the wider Illyrian landscape? Christian and Ishmael.
I don't think either of us have done the play, but just reading through it last night and today, we realized how much we'd like to do the play. It's one of those weird plays for me where I love Twelfth Night, and yet I've never been drawn towards a role in it that dramatically. I've never thought, I have to play that role. But for me, what's super fun about this scene is, there's so many shared lines in it. Just textually, he sets them up as such a team. And I think that's really fun, even from the very top, that they bounce off each other like that. And then also, I love what you guys were talking about either sex or gender, or however you want to think about it. I think with this play and with, As You Like It, I've done Orlando before, there's a choice to be made of, as an actor, you try and think about, who am I falling in love with here? And ultimately, it always comes down to that they're falling in love with a person, that it's about falling in love with this person in front of me, regardless of whether, in Orlando's case, he knows Ganymede is Rosalind or not.
Right, and how much does Viola invest in the disguise? Because, there are versions where it's taken really far and she's got that deep voice or the whatever in the gate. And there's a version that I'm actually really interested in where it's like the culture does the work for her. She's wearing the outfit, so she doesn't really need to do much else. And she has kind of a really interesting opportunity in this play, but also in this scene where there are certain things that men can only hear from other men. And so it's just like, she has this moment where she can really give you insight into a woman that if a woman wearing being a woman were to say, the character of Orsino would just dismiss outright. So it's this fun game where I think that she is getting to see who this man really is, and also get to hear some insights that she wouldn't otherwise.
Yeah, that's fascinating about how gender becomes a mouthpiece for instruction, for moral instruction in a way. I mean, Fran, would you like to come in on that about how that works in the play?
Well, what this conversation is making me think about too is that Viola or Cesario, the accomplishment of the scene is to be sent back to Olivia, which is the last thing that Cesario actually wants. So I think it's interesting to see that, how the consequence kind of runs away. But I think I loved the way you were talking about different ways of playing this part. And one of the things I love about the play, because so many productions really want to straighten up that ending by putting Viola in her maiden's weeds, as she describes them, in a wedding dress or something. But in terms of the eroticism of it, it's very hard to make it anything but fluid and queer. Because if we imagine a very feminine Cesario, then that's who Olivia wants, right? So Olivia is attracted to a very feminine appearing person. And as we look at the kind of Cesario, Sebastian, Viola triangle, there's just no way out of the eroticism they provoke being quite fluid. And let me throw in one more thing while I think of it as just, all the things you learn both from performances and from the classroom. I had a student who said, so those immigrants come in and they shake everything up and they're the big winners in the plot. And many of my students are immigrants. And I thought, that's so fascinating. And when you look at charts of the play, it'll often call them the shipwrecked twins or something. But to think of them as these somewhat gender non-binary or fluid people who come from elsewhere and totally grab all of the desire and get the big rewards at the end of the plot is a really fun way of thinking about it.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm also reminded of how when you watch these plays in the theatre, you collaborate in the kind of slipping that Shakespeare was so curious about. You yourself undergo a really interesting experience of erotic energy, which is not any longer living within the normal binaries. Like he actually, makes us complicit in a joyful way with really what it means to feel love. Drew.
Well, all this makes me think of one answer to a famous seeming crux in the play, which is why Orsino agrees so readily and so quickly at the end of Act 5. One of the famous lines in the play, "I too shall partake in this most happy rack." But he's never met the quote unquote real Viola, but obviously he's attracted to Cesario. And I think this scene, which is one of the few scenes they have in the middle of the play, actually, is filled with that flirtatious energy as well as the kind of male-male homosocial busting each other's you-know-what's energy. And that's part of the magic of the play. But we should be moving on to Romeo and Juliet. Obviously, we could talk about Twelfth Night all night long. Yes, Simon.
I'm just wondering whether to cut across momentarily before we go on into Verona in this extraordinary journey through Love and Shakespeare. Grace, is there anything that you'd like to share from our audience?
Sure. No questions just yet, but we have a few interesting comments. Viewer Reed, who picked up on something Christian was saying, how those female parts were played by young boys, creating the further nuance. So that is maybe skipping back a few moments ago, but some of our viewers picking up on that. A comment from a viewer, Stephanie, who says, the first time I saw Twelfth Night was at Wellesley College, their Shakespeare Society, and women played all the roles. Talk about an interesting role reversal. So another interesting way to think about staging the show. So, but on to Romeo and Juliet next.
Yeah, the Seven Sisters, Twelfth Night. That's definitely one to watch out for. So whereas in Twelfth Night, there's this pursuit of love and love in all of its disguises and its sort of metamorphic possibilities. One of the things that's strikingly different about Romeo and Juliet is that Shakespeare actually dramatizes a love at first sight scene. Romeo and Juliet, they lock eyes in the masked ball of the Capulets. And really the rest of the play is about trying to get back to that one moment that Shakespeare so brilliantly poeticizes and dramatizes. There are all these obstacles that get thrown in the way immediately. The sun rising, Tybalt challenging Romeo to a duel, and then Mercutio dying, Romeo being banished to Mantua. It's kind of like this hectic race to get back to this one moment of almost crystallized in outside of time that Shakespeare depicts here. And I'm speaking, of course, of Act 1, Scene 5, between Romeo and Juliet at the Capulets' mask ball. Christian and Ishmenia.
If I profane with my unworthiest hand this holy shrine, the gentle sin is this: my lips, two blushing pilgrims ready stand to smooth that rough touch with a tender kiss.
Good pilgrim, you do wrong your hand too much, which mannerly devotion shows in this. For saints have hands that pilgrims' hands do touch, and palm to palm is holy palmer's kiss.
Have not saints lips and holy palmers too?
Aye, pilgrim, lips that must be used in prayer.
Oh, then, dear saint, let lips do what hands do. They pray. Grant thou, lest faith turn to despair.
Saints do not move, though grant for prayer's sake.
Then move not, while my prayer's effect I take. Thus from my lips, by thine, my sin is purged.
Then have my lips the sin that they have took.
Sin from my lips? Oh, trespass sweetly urged. Give me my sin again.
You kiss by the book.
Brilliant. Wow. Wow. I mean, I just want to say thank you as well. What a kind of shock it is to see a live kiss these days in our COVID world. It's like,
Yeah.
on screen, like it has everything seems to be supercharged afresh by this really demanding time that we've been in. But one is to almost re-sense us to contact. And I just had that experience watching that scene. So, and extraordinary, isn't it, that Shakespeare, the director, puts in stage directions within the body, but within his language. So he actually puts in the kiss, or the double kiss. And it's, for me, as a director, absolutely fabulous to really sense his stagecraft in that. Drew, and then Fran.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Simon, tagging on to that point, it really does feel like we have forgotten what it's like to just live as people in society. And something, I think it's going to be extraordinary just seeing Shakespeare plays again when we are able to in the theater. Fran, I'm wondering what your insights and observations are on this very famous, iconic scene.
Boy, I'm agreeing with all this sense of how meanings have changed, and also the intensity of pleasure we're going to bring to the theater. I want to actually build on things that both Christian and Ishmania said about the last reading. So Christian, in terms of talking about the Twelfth Night scene, talked about how they shared lines. And one of the things that's famous about this exchange is that Romeo and Juliet make a sonnet together, and the couplet of the sonnet, which couples them, right, ends with the kiss. Then move not while my prayer's effect I take. That's line 14. And so the kiss, and that's like, score, did it. You know, we did the sonnet together, and then they move on. Ishmania had talked about the kind of interplay that was possible between Cesario Viola and Orsino. And I think it's so, when you see that sonnet that they make together, and the confidence that Romeo brings as he turns to Juliet, the moment when she says, "Oh, I get it. Right, I understand. I hear that you started a sonnet, and I know sonnets, and I'm on it. Here's my stanza for you. Back to you, Romeo." I mean, the whole thing shifts in her ability to know the rules of the game and play them. There's also the line that you had a lot of fun with, Ishmania, which is the "you kiss by the book." And editors have a lot of thoughts about, what does that mean? You kiss proficiently, you kiss predictably, you kiss like you went to the seminar on kissing, which is good, and yet, I mean, whatever it means, the fact that she's giving him notes on the kiss also gives you a way of seeing her agency and her confidence in this scene, which we don't always give Juliet enough credit for, I think. And then, one more point, which I think really came out in the reading, which is how the language of religion and of eroticism are totally intertwined here. You can't separate them. And so this tells us both that religious practice, and Shakespeare's putting it in Italy, right? Those Catholics, they're especially passionate and material, physical, corporeal in their relation to faith. So there's a way in which he's telling you something about faith and religious practice, but he's also using its intensity to help you understand something about what's happening between these two lovers.
Yes, and absolutely right, and I think it's a very confident blending, isn't it, of the religious and the erotic, and how it at one level sets up a kind of objectification of each other, of statues and can I touch them and I'm the pilgrim, and then that melts into essentially something that I took from the reading and from your comments, Brian, is that love is accumulative. That we from the word go, Romeo and Juliet make something together. They're not static. They are momentous. And thinking too around this question of chemistry, and it was wonderful, Christian and Ishmani reading it then, because we felt the chemistry. And as a director, one of the hardest things is to actually is to create chemistry on the stage between two people who may not have it, although sometimes Shakespeare helps you because there's a way that he's so in control, he's so confident that he can almost generate chemistry by speaking the words that he's written in a lively way. And indeed, it's also a peculiar thing, and I want to hand over to Christian and Ishmani for their thoughts on this, but I think there's something also about, like, we know anatomically, if you smile, you will actually feel happier. And I think there's something about when you kiss somebody else, whatever you might be feeling about them beforehand, there's somehow about the physiological act of a kiss strangely can be bonding. So it's as if he's got these strategies to help the actors discover or generate a kind of chemistry. Having said all that, in my experience of directing the play twice, it's an awful lot easier to direct the play when there is natural chemistry than when you're having to create it in difficult conditions. Christian and Ishmani, yes, let me ask you again, what's your experience of the play? Have you played the parts? Have you seen the parts?
Yeah. I've never played Juliet. And I'm actually at a point in my life where I'm like, I may never play Juliet.
I feel like I'm just coming into my Romeo years,
Yeah,
so I feel like there may be some opportunities for me.
But it's just, what can you say about this play that hasn't been said so many times? It's beautiful, and what I do love about this scene, and I love about the relationship, is that, like, when we meet Romeo and throughout most of the play, he's so cocky and he has so much bravado. And I just love how Juliet just goes right past that and, like, can see it and match it with her own, like, wit and intellect, and, like, see who he really is, and also shake some of that bravado. So you get to see the boy and, like, who he really is, and, like, and who she falls in love with.
You know, this was, I was one of those, I didn't come to Shakespeare very early. I think in middle school was the first time I read a Shakespeare play, which was Julius Caesar, which just went completely over my head at the time. And Romeo and Juliet was the first play that kind of sucked me in a little bit. But it wasn't these two that sucked me in. I think I sort of saw Romeo as a bit of a sap. And so I loved Mercutio because I had never, like, just his point of view about Romeo was sort of how I felt about them at the time. So I've always loved Mercutio, and I've always, and frankly, Ishmani was asking me, hey, have you played a lot of lovers? And I was like, I don't tend to play the ingenue types. I tend to play the Mercutios, or it's someone with a little more of a point of view about it. But just reading, but just reading it just now, something about that sonnet, and it's always tricky with rhyming. Well, there's just the couplet at the end, but anytime you have rhyming verse, and we met doing a play in rhyming verse, it's tricky how to play it. You can hit those rhymes too hard, where all people hear is the rhymes. But there was something just reading it this time where there's a real sweetness in the ringing of that second rhyme.
They're making a song together.
Yeah, it is. It's this, like, really sweet lullaby. I mean, and this poem, and as you said, Simon, it does the work for you.
And Christian, can you remind us of that rhyme that you mentioned? It's just, and then I'd love to hear back over to Fran. The second rhyme that you mentioned just then. Just remind the viewers of where that comes.
Well, so of course, you've got an A, C, D rhyme scheme for this thing. And so the first time we hear it is, if I profane with my unworthiest hand, this holy shrine, the gentle sin is this, my lips to blushing pilgrims ready stand, to smooth that rough touch with a tender kiss. So the stand and kiss, and as you can see, like even just now, me punching them a little bit makes it not quite work right, because it's also in the middle of a longer thought. So that's always a really tricky thing for actors, is making sure you're communicating the thought like a human being and not like a poetry robot.
Yeah, that is interesting. And actually, funny enough, before I hand over to Fran, I was fortunate enough to be just the last few months making a film of Romeo and Juliet, and it was helpful for me. I went back to London I was meant to direct the play at the National Theatre in London, and then it got cancelled due to COVID, and so we made a film of it instead. And what was exciting about the film was that, of course, I could get much closer to Romeo and Juliet in this moment than you ever can do on the stage. And in fact, we were using the cinema. We were able to shoot the scene. Not, traditionally on stage, the couple have to sort of either leave the party and be in private for this moment, so basically period, or there are adventures like freezing everyone else at the party and a kind of pause and then kind of spotlight on these two. But with cinema, we could actually do the scene whereby the party was continuing, and Juliet was actually being put in front of Paris by her mum at the party to kind of be presented. But she sort of turned around, and Romeo was able to kind of sneak up and kind of whisper the lines in her ear while she replied. So it was kind of hiding in plain sight, and it was certainly liberating. Going, oh yes, there are flaws in cinema, but there are also some big benefits. But
Simon, your comment about chemistry made me think of, I don't know if you've read the Bill Ball directing book, but he has this anecdote where he says, if you're rehearsing Romeo and Juliet, the one thing you must attend to is that the Romeo and the Juliet are not hooking up during rehearsals, because it will kill their on-stage chemistry. What they do after you open is fine, which of course is a bit silly, but I just always think of that when I think of this play.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are books to be written on the do's and the don'ts of chemistry, and it's a fascinating study. Fran, and then Drew, if that's okay. Fran.
Just a quick comment in terms of when we were talking about the making of the sonnet. Romeo is responsible for his own rhymes in his first stanza. Then Juliet takes over and she can create her own rhymes. What gets really interesting is in the middle. Then when Romeo says, have not saints lips and holy palmers too, he starts a new rhyme, E. And then it's like, okay, Juliet. And she does the F. And then, so that stanza they make together and the couplet they make together. So it's as if it really is like a dance or a game that gets more and more complicated, and the intimacy between them as collaborators becomes more and more intense as it moves towards the finish.
Yes, brilliant how Shakespeare technically achieves these effects. It's so interesting, I think. Drew.
Yeah, there's so many things to say about this passage, and I think actually, Grace-Ann, you've been raising your hand. You have a question for us?
Yeah, I have a few audience questions. So first is going back a bit. A few viewers wonder if you kiss by the book, if the book might mean the Bible. I don't know if any of you could shed light on that. But the second question is from viewer Barbara S., who asks, despite the superficiality of their first interaction, isn't the beauty of the play that Romeo and Juliet love with such depth and sacrifice? And I thought maybe before we move on, or Drew, if you have another question, maybe from the whole panel, I mean, what is the most beautiful thing about Romeo and Juliet's relationship? I feel like there's so many aspects that you could pick out and highlight, but maybe if one jumps out to you, I would love to hear that from any of you.
Yes, thanks, Grace-Ann. Well, maybe Fran, you could kick us off on is the book the Bible, and indeed, what is the sort of redemption or the meaning of the love in Romeo and Juliet, the high point of it? Yes, Fran.
Let's see. Most editors don't think of it as the Bible in terms of kissing the Bible, because you would normally do that to indicate the seriousness of what you were saying. There's a famous, in one of Shakespeare's contemporaries, the Duchess of Malfi, a corrupt cardinal gets his mistress to kiss a poisoned Bible and kills her that way. So there certainly was awareness of kissing the Bible as something you get someone to do to show that they're telling the truth. That's not normally how people interpret this, but it's always interesting. I never want to say, no, that's not what it is. So I think to look at that whole pattern of religious imagery that we were talking about and connect that to possibly imagining the book as the Bible, I think it would be interesting to think about what that means and what it means as commentary on that kiss. if the book is the Bible, what is the grade that Romeo is getting as a kisser? In terms of it's hard to say. I don't think that their beginning is superficial. In some ways, I think that's what we've been talking about. They can collaborate and hear and see and touch each other so intensely right away that's, I think, and Drew was talking about this, they have it all right there. And then all they have to do, the whole play, is them trying to get back to that place, as Drew put it, to defend that precious connection against all of their families and the craziness of the world around them. At the simplest level, I mean, what do I think is the most powerful? It's that they have intense desire and they think it matters. They think their love matters. They think they have a future and that they get to script it. And that's still so moving.
And I think also, Fran, going off what you were saying in your initial gloss to this passage, is that Romeo and Juliet are different from each other. He speaks one kind of love poetry, and she responds with a totally different kind of love poetry that's maybe a little bit less flowery, less schooled, and more direct. And that really turns him on. And they recognize each other's humanity, and they fall in love with each other as human beings, as people. And that's what Shakespeare depicts so indelibly in this scene. And there, in terms of by the book, what does it mean in literal terms? I think often you can play this game of like trying to hunt the reference, but in dramaturgical terms, it's more about the intention and the emotion underlying and animating the language rather than what the poetic allusion is to, right? What is the heart of the scene about in emotional and human terms, rather than, oh, is he making a reference to Protestantism or Catholicism or what have you? Yeah.
Yes. Let me, Fran was coming briefly, then we'll go to Christian and then Edmund for some final thoughts on Romeo and Juliet before we move on to something quite different. Fran.
I was just going to say really quickly that to me as an editor, but especially as a teacher, I always want to say an allusion always opens a door or raises a question. It never shuts the door. It never explains what the meaning is. And I would actually also just add to what you were saying, Drew, if we thought of the word effect rather than intention, since we never know what the intention is, what's the effect of this happening? Because that puts the onus on the audience, the reader, the student. What was the impact on you of this happening this way, of her saying that?
Yeah, right. I'm introducing Stanislavskian terminology here, anachronistically to Shakespeare. So to move on to Antony and Cleopatra, unlike Romeo and Juliet, instead of showing these characters falling in love, Shakespeare begins the play after Antony has already eloped to Egypt, run away from his Roman wife, initiated this romantic relationship with the Egyptian queen. So these are fully formed people, politically powerful people, at arguably the top of the political hierarchy in their respective worlds, which are Western and Eastern worlds. They are maybe ethnically different people. They are radically different people who are drawn to each other, maybe for some reasons similar to Romeo and Juliet because of their differences. But it's a strikingly different depiction of their love that Shakespeare shows us at the top of the play. And so we're going to read a passage from Act 1, Scene 1, which is the first scene Shakespeare gives us. And it's basically Antony saying, "Oh, I have to leave. I have things to attend to back in Rome." He's in Cleopatra's court. He's in sort of foreign territory, and this is her response to his conflict.
If it be love indeed, tell me how much.
There's beggary in the love that can be reckoned.
I'll set the born how far to be beloved.
Then must thou needs find out new heaven, new earth.
News, my good lord, from Rome.
Grates me. The sum.
Nay, hear them, Antony. Fulvia perchance is angry, or who knows if the scarce bearded Caesar have not sent his powerful mandate to you, do this or this. Take in that kingdom and enfranchise that. Perform or else we damn thee.
How, my love?
Perchance, nay, and most like. You must not stay here longer. Your dismission is come from Caesar, therefore hear it, Antony. Where's Fulvia's process? Caesar's, I would say, both. Call in the messengers, as I am Egypt's queen. Thou blushest, Antony, and that blood of thine is Caesar's homager, else so thy cheek pays shame when shrill-tongued Fulvia scolds. The messengers!
Let Rome in Tiber melt, and the wide arch of the ranged empire fall. Here is my space. Kingdoms are clay. Our dungy earth alike feeds beast as man. The nobleness of life is to do thus. Mwah. When such a mutual pair and such a twain can do't, in which I bind, on pain of punishment, the world to weet, we stand up peerless.
Excellent falsehood. Why did he marry Fulvia and not love her? I'll seem the fool I am not. Antony will be himself.
But stirred by Cleopatra.
Fantastic, absolutely brilliant. And again, I mean, what a triple whammy tonight of the three great Shakespearean couples, and there they all are, by the same pen, and yet so different. Well, I mean, for me, again, it's been exciting just remembering these three plays, because I think for our audience too, I'm sure as you're watching these scenes, you're remembering productions that you've seen, actors that have played these parts. For me, Christian and Ijmeni brought back memories of Ray Fiennes and Sophie Okonedo doing the play with me in the National Theatre, and it's just a very, very fiery relationship, this. We saw in Romeo and Juliet a couple, well, first of all, we saw in For me, Twelfth Night, a couple speaking in kind of delicate code, a play all about learning, as we said, to fall in love, learning to see what is in front of you, learning to be authentic. Then you have Romeo and Juliet, who are there from the beginning, creating, accumulating, but never get, crucially, to old age, because Romeo and Juliet are dead within days of meeting each other, which is this other extraordinarily tragic poignancy in the story. Then, and it's almost as if, wouldn't it be extraordinary for the same two actors to have played Romeo and Juliet to then, 30 years later, play Antony and Cleopatra, because you have a couple that are addicted to each other, but as much through their kind of warring spirit as it is their complementary spirit. And that makes it a very combustible and very, in a way, challenging relationship to play. Fran, let's hear your response to the scene.
It's a great scene, and it was a great performance. Thank you. I find them so sexy. And I think the sexiness of Antony and Cleopatra is that they aren't kids, and that they not only have clearly had lots of sex with each other, but with lots of other people. The fact that Cleopatra mentions Fulvia 3 times in this scene, just in case you were confused about the fact that he does have a wife and he's going to have another one later, right? The complexity of their sexual histories, the fact that they're both so powerful, and that their games are as political as they are erotic, and the languages for eros and politics are not separable in this period at all. And so this couple really makes us think about that. I think I love the fact that Antony, who gets out-talked in many ways in this scene, partly because, you know, he's got that wife, and that's kind of giving him a little bit of a problem in the bargaining position. He calls them a mutual pair, and he says they're peerless. For me, those are really important words, because mutuality is not something that is all that often associated with marriage or even with heterosexual couples in this period. And when he says we're mutual, he's talking about them as mighty opposites in a way, in the way that his political rivals also are. They stand toe to toe. And he says they're peerless. There's really no one else like them. So neither could find a partner in anyone else who would be mutual in this way. Now, I think in the period, there's a sense that mutuality produces conflict in a way that Petruchio says in Taming the Shrew, you know, he'll have peace and love and quiet life, and he's going to get that by taming his shrew, by asserting hierarchy within that marriage. Here we see the incredible erotic energy of that mutuality and the seeds of its possible conflict and destruction right there from the beginning.
And it seems like in some ways, if the erotic frisson in Romeo and Juliet comes from religion and romance, here it's politics. The eroticism of politically powerful people is a very important ingredient in the play.
Yes.
Simon.
Well, before I hand over to Christian, it is about how it feels reading that scene as opposed to the other two scenes that we've heard this evening. I just want to add one thought, which is that I suppose in Romeo and Juliet, the Romeo and Juliet are killed by the world in which they inhabit. But arguably, Antony and Cleopatra are somehow responsible for their own, well, both, of course, kill themselves, but it feels like they are also self-destructive. I mean, I'm just thinking of Cleopatra abandoning Antony's fleet in the second half, that they're on a kind of self-destructive drive, which adds to that sort of almost rock star mentality that they have with each other. They are flammable, dangerous, unpredictable, and totally mutually dependent in the end, we discover. Christian and Ejmania.
Yeah, I was thinking about how, and I think Fran mentioned this, they're world famous. I mean, if you think about, they're these huge world celebrities, you know, it's like Joe Biden and Angela Merkel hooking up or something. No, I apologize for putting that image into your head, but you know what I mean? It's these two world celebrities and the politics of that. And then also the sensuality, you know, I was talking earlier with the team here before we got on about how I'd seen a production at the National in the fall of '99 with Helen Mirren and Alan Rickman. And it opened, it was a massive, you know, it was one of the just big set pieces, but it opened with, there must have been 35 people laying around, drinking wine, eating food, massaging each other, you know. It's a very sensual opening to a play, I think, if you want to set it up right. And there's something so exciting about that and so different from the other plays that we were looking at.
Yeah, just going from reading Romeo and Juliet to reading these two, it's incredibly satisfying for me because you go from children who are discovering love and discovering their firsts, to two adult people with agency, with a lot of power and like no self-restraint. And so it just becomes this like, it's so much fun to dive into right after Romeo and Juliet. It really is.
And it's remarkable how Cleopatra totally dominates this scene. She's such a forceful presence, maybe somewhat like Volumnia and Coriolanus, but arguably without any kind of peer in the canon as just this mature, formidable woman.
Totally, but of course you could also say that what's in common with Romeo and Juliet and Antony and Cleopatra is, of course, as Romeo and Juliet goes on, Juliet becomes in the ascendant. I mean, more and more Romeo and Juliet becomes Juliet's play. And I think that's absolutely the case, Drew. I agree, in Antony and Cleopatra, where it's Cleopatra that has those last scenes on the monument, that has this absolutely extraordinary poetry and has a very remarkably dignified death. Of course, Antony's death goes wrong. You know, he tries to kill himself, he doesn't manage it, he has to get dragged. I mean, I remember trying to help Ray Fiennes, you know, get dragged up the monument, and it's really complicated because it's meant to be an undignified moment. And yet it's very easy for that moment to also slide into a kind of comedy. But in a way, you can't help that Shakespeare sort of wants that in a funny way. Christian?
Doesn't he has I don't remember, but he has a line, something about not dead yet or something, when he's trying to kill himself, that's a dangerously comic line.
Totally, Christian. And actually, I think Rafe and I decided that the only way we could get that line out to avoid laughter was for him just to say it very quietly.
Yeah, that's a good. And you know, I also was thinking about how it's a long distance relationship. You know, It starts out there together, but then it becomes, one of the things I love about this play is that it takes place on multiple continents, and it's the fourth act, I think, has 15 scenes in it. It's just this epic play, and it ends up being a long distance relationship, which is
totally. And I'm now thinking that when we go back into the theatre, maybe someone will do a production of it, which kind of combines live with them on Zoom together across things, which I'm sure would be very exciting. Drew.
And one possible thread that we might be able to draw here, that I think Fran mentioned with Twelfth Night and also with Romeo and Juliet, is the female character giving notes to the male character on their misapprehensions about romantic love, right? Viola Cesario is saying, well, you know, I have a sister and this is actually what it looks like. Juliet says, you kiss by the book, right? She's sort of annotating, glossing the scene as it's happening. And here, by this point, Cleopatra is just like totally reading the riot act to Antony, giving him just the litany of things to think about and wrestle with. So I'm curious, Fran, if my reading checks out with you.
Yeah, I think that does make sense to me in terms of there's this long process of preparing for Cleopatra, because there's nothing, she is sans pareil, she's peerless. But I think that's absolutely right. She takes giving some gentle instruction to the level of just, yelling at him, but also scripting him. The great moment where he follows her and she says, "I didn't think you were going to follow me." And he says, "Well, you should have known I would follow you," right? So she's writing the script in a way that he is in some ways quite disastrous for him. There's also, in terms of the gender fluidity, I mean, in some ways they stand as these kind of godlike figures of masculinity and femininity. But the fact that Antony's suicide is so botched, and the fact that he dies at the end of Act 4, right? So leaving Act 5 to Cleopatra, that is extremely unusual. And that puts him structurally in a feminized position. That would be more what we might expect of a woman in a tragedy. That happens to the Duchess of Malfi. That happens to Miriam in the Tragedy of Miriam. The rare Renaissance tragedies that really focus on women. So there's a gender problem that he's in, that where his death is signals to us. So I think her power becomes that power we even associate with, say, Rosalind in a comedy, the power of the female character to be a kind of director or playwright. And I think she absolutely tells him what she thinks of him. Not that she stops him from remarrying again. I mean, that's interesting too, right? She's angry and powerful, but there are limits on her ability to control his actions.
Yes, and actually, I remember that in the production that I worked on, the person, so basically, Cleopatra, for our viewers, to remind them, is in the monument at the end, locked up by Caesar. And normally in the original, it's a guard that just basically says to Cleopatra, "Look, I need to tell you that he's going to take you back to Rome and parade you as a slave." And Cleopatra then decides on that moment really to kill herself. And in the version that we worked on, we actually gave those lines to Octavia, who had come to Egypt with her brother, who had found Cleopatra, and in a final act of, as it were, female solidarity, was the one to say, "Look, I'm going to break ranks here, and I'm going to tell you, woman to woman, what my brother has in store." And it felt like a way of raising up the courage of Octavia, but also raising up Cleopatra for hearing that from a woman that was saying this, rather than a kind of just another soldier. Ashwini.
Yeah, I just wanted, that's beautiful, by the way, and I wish I'd seen that. But one thing that I just brought to mind, as concerns really all of Shakespeare's lovers, a friend of mine, Jacob Fischel, ran this really incredible class on archetypes in Shakespeare. One thing that he said that has never left me and that I now apply whenever I play a lover is that he sees Shakespeare's lovers as two halves of one soul. And so when one half dies, the other must. Half a soul can't exist on its own. And so I've always found that, and I found that incredibly useful in playing Lady M and other roles, but like it really, I mean, you see it time and time again in Shakespeare's plays where when one lover dies, the other one does. It's inevitable.
Yeah.
Of course, that idea goes back to Plato's Symposium and Aristophanes' Parable of Love. So Neoplatonic Renaissance theory right there. Sorry, Simon.
Well, I was going to say, and also thank you, Edmund, for showing that. That's going to be very useful. I'm going to take that on because I think it really helps one to grapple with the question of why would you die when your loved one has died? And it's a very intense provocation for the actor. And I think this idea of going, I have already died, and therefore I just complete an action is beautiful. Greta.
I have no questions to share at the moment.
Okay. But
wrapped by the conversation.
Yes.
Maybe I should make some of our final comments. I can't quite bear to end this evening. I'm having so much fun and I'm learning so much. Thank you. But as we're writing things down, as I hope we have been to put in our Valentine's cards at the weekend, some of this extraordinarily famous love writing, I should just say that next week we're going to be discussing one of Shakespeare's other very big couple plays, which of course is The Taming of the Shrew. We've discussed this play, we've referenced this play numerous times over the last 35 episodes, but we thought there was high time to have a show just about the Taming of the Shrew. So joining me is going to be the great director Liliana Blaine-Cruz, the New York Times columnist Maureen Dowd, and Dr. Tobias Gregory, who is a wonderful academic. I read an article by him recently in the Times Literary Supplement when I was in London, was absolutely blown away by his erudition. So we've got three remarkable panelists joining us next week, as I hope you will, for the Taming of the Shrew. Otherwise, I think it's just time for me to say a huge thank you to Fran, to Christian, to Ejmenia for throwing so much light on couples, romance, and love in Shakespeare. Thank you. Thank you to Grace Ann, to Drew, and of course, to all of you for tuning in, for being with us tonight. And I look forward to seeing you next week. Once again, it's good night from me and good night from my amazing panel. Good night.